What is going on, guys? It is only a matter of time before the UFC finds its first MMA superstar, its first UFC superstar that hails from India. Now, I know you guys might be thinking, hey, hold on a second. How many Indian fighters have ever fought in the UFC? We'll cover that as well. But the reason I think the UFC will have a UFC superstar sooner rather than later is purely based on the potential and the market size. So one of the first things I want to show you guys is this graph that kind of shows how big the Indian YouTube audience is at 476 million as compared to other countries, United States being the second one with 238. So it's a huge market on social media. These guys are doing whatever they can to, with their limited resources, to get on social media. Now, every Indian friend that I speak with, or every person that comes from India, whether to the United States or my Indian friends in the UK, the first thing they say is the UFC is huge in India. You walk down the street and you see someone wearing a Tony Ferguson t-shirt. Now, they might not really know too much about Tony Ferguson or be able to watch his fights, but they love it. They love the OCTAGON. They love the show. And to them, it's like, it's an aspiration to get there. And I think they will. So the second graph that I want to show you guys is the number of proficient English speakers in India is near 130 million. So just to put it in perspective, the United States has around 300 million proficient English speakers. Obviously, there's people from different countries and so on and so forth. But 9% of India's population of 1.5 billion people essentially speaks English. Again, huge market, huge potential for the UFC to expand, and I don't think it'll cost them that much. Now, you may be thinking, okay, why wasn't China on that first graph about YouTube? Well, because China is restricted. They have filtering by their government, and I think they have their own YouTube-style app. I might be mistaken on that. Obviously, people who are more educated on the matter can comment below. Let's move on. Okay, so till now there have been 4 Indian fighters, one which represented Canada and 3 others that actually represented India inside the UFC octagon. The first person that represented Canada but is definitely of Indian descent is a fighter named Arjan Bhullar. Now, Arjan was a Commonwealth wrestler, a medalist, I believe a gold medalist if I'm not mistaken, and he is of the Sikh culture. Now, I wish I'd put up a picture of Arjan wearing his traditional garb, his Sikh turban, but Arjan, I'm sure, would have loved to represent India and would have loved to do any promotion to progress and grow the UFC inside the Indian border. So Arjan went 3-1 in the UFC, and his lone loss came to Adam Wejorek in 2018. After his contract was finished, there was a contract dispute. They couldn't agree on a price, and Arjan went to ONE FC, where he became the ONE FC heavyweight champion, defeating Brandon Vera. Unfortunately, he later lost that title to Anatoly Malikin, and his last fight he lost to an Iranian heavyweight wrestler. So Arjan was pretty successful, and he could have been a superstar had he got the push from the UFC. We move on to another person who can be a superstar by the name of Anshul Jubli. Now, this young man is technically 0-1 in the UFC, because his first 2 fights that he won were road to UFC. The first one was road to UFC, I believe, semifinals, yes, and the second one was the finals, even though it did happen on the Lewis versus Spivak card. His first and only technical UFC fight, he lost to Mike Breeden by KO. Now, this guy is young, this guy can get it back, and he is talented. If I'm the UFC, I'm going to try to get behind this guy, maybe give him a favorable matchup and try to push him as much as possible, get him on the promotion, get him on, all of UFC's hype media, and I'm sure this guy can be a star, and maybe he is a star in India. You guys can comment below about that one as well. We move on to a young lady, the first Indian-born fighter, the first person representing the Indian flag to get a win inside the octagon, by the name of Pooja Tumar. Now, Pooja Tumar, Obviously, he's 1-0 in the UFC. She is a little bit up there in age, but it just shows the potential. This young lady is able to get a split decision against Rayan Amanda and put India on the map. Again, I'm sure if the UFC wanted to push this girl and they wanted to really help the Indian market grow, it wouldn't be that much of a problem. Last but not least, a gentleman by the name of Bharat Kahandre. Now, again, if I get these names wrong, I am sorry. These are way out of my league as far as pronunciation. This gentleman fought in 2017 and only fought one time in the UFC. Now, his one time didn't go according to plan, losing in the first round by front choke to none other than Song Yadong. Now, Song Yadong is a top-level bantamweight. At this point, he wasn't, but the potential was all there. So, your first fight in the UFC, you get Song Yadong. That's a tough fight. That's a super tough fight. So, him losing to Song Yadong is not, it's not a big deal to me. I'm sure he could have came back and got a more favorable matchup and maybe got his hand raised, being the first Indian-born fighter to actually win in the octagon at that point. But unfortunately for him, he did test positive for some banned substances, and the UFC and him had to part ways. So, let's think about it this way, guys. The UFC, as far as we know, has tried to expand in Mexico. They definitely expanded in Europe, starting with the UK. They are expanding in the Middle East, Saudi Arabian fighters, UAE fighters. They're doing their best to expand in all markets of the world, all of the continents. Australia and New Zealand, they've got their hands there. They're pretty much everywhere. It's only a matter of time before UFC starts expanding into India. And I think India is an untapped market with a lot of potential, and a superstar from India will come sooner rather than later. Guys, if you know any information about Indian MMA, which I'm not privy to, please leave a comment below. And also let me know, who's the best up-and-coming fighter from India that you guys know?